Okay, so thank you, Mark, very much for giving me your time today and agreeing to be in this conversation. So I want to introduce you first of all. So you're an EMDR therapist, supervisor, trainer, consultant with decades of experience, and you specialize in attachment-informed EMDR. And you're particularly interested, as I read on your website, in the relational approach as well. So not just working and processing the attachment wounds that we've all experienced, no doubt, but also using the therapy relationship itself to also help to shift some of those misattunements. And you've also in your previous life been a foreign correspondent. So thank you for coming along. And I asked you to come along today because I'm in the process of writing a book called You Don't Have to Abandon Yourself to Belong. And it's based on my own experiences, my own struggles, my own learnings. In particular, as I've been on this new path of my life, trying to design a slightly new career for myself and relocating from London to Lisbon, 2 children from 1 child. And so some of the themes I've been grappling with, I think are relevant to lots of people, and I was interested to speak to you, in particular about your kind of intergenerational work that you do. But maybe just to begin with, because this is a conversation that I want to be accessible for everyone, could you briefly summarize what EMDR is and how it works?
Big question.
Yeah.
Good to hear about the 2 children. I was only aware of 1. That's very good news. And relocating to Lisbon. What you've done, Alex, is sort of taken your fate in your own 2 hands and rewired the present in order hoping that the future will be better than perhaps the past has always been. And that's a big thing, to have 2 kids and move to Lisbon. In a sense, what EMDR does, and it's a psychotherapy that was put together about 35 years ago, its sort of fundamental elements were put together about 35 years ago, and it's getting quite a lot of traction around the world as a way of working, not just with trauma, but with anxiety and depression and lots of stuff that people bring that they'd like to get shifted. What EMDR fundamentally does, and we can talk about some of the nitty-gritty of how it does it, it takes the past, it takes a client, they bring their story, they bring how they got to be the way they are, big traumas, little traumas, life, childhood, previous generational experiences in the family system, belonging to a group, belonging to a nation. They bring everything. And our job as EMDR therapists, and your job as an EMDR therapist, is to find those stories that are still running in the nervous system in a dysfunctional way. They can be individual, they can be collective. And what we do with EMDR is we find the nub of the story, not just by talking about it, by trusting a lot of intuition and relationship, as you said, using the therapeutic relationship, using the trust that builds up between client and therapist, to find those stories and to allow the parts that got left behind with emotions and physical sensations and stories about self, I'm not good enough, I'm bad, it's all my fault, and we rewire it as if for real. Come back to the present, and the present feels different. That means that the future can be different too. So it's a pretty amazing therapy. When it works, it's pretty amazing.
Totally agree. Yeah, I totally agree. So yeah, taking the stories, taking the memories, taking the emotions and processing them to then create a different present, and based on that then a different future, hopefully.
Yeah, it's a big claim. And
thank you also for acknowledging my trying to do that for myself and take my life in my own hands, so to speak. I think, yeah, it's definitely still a process, but yeah, moving in
it always is. The process never stops.
Yeah.
Probably after death as well, for all I know.
Yeah.
But I'm a bit closer to that than you are.
I wanted to ask one thing, which is in my sort of self-exploration, I've been looking at ways that I've abandoned myself to belong that are obviously, out of awareness, and I think that's the understanding, isn't it, with our attachment wounds. They're not things that we cognitively came to a thinking process about when we were young, because we were too young to think about it. We just acted. Yeah. But one was this sort of almost like a sort of pact that I made with my mother, for example, that I will struggle in order to take some of your suffering away, for example, or I will sacrifice myself, my needs, in order for you to be happy. As I said, obviously these weren't thought about, but I've noticed that in terms of my own experience of maybe hesitating to show up more, to be bigger, to have more of a voice. And so I was particularly interested in your intergenerational stuff that you do. And I was wondering if you could say a bit more about that and how because I think, why I say intergenerational, because I think it was something that wasn't just me doing in my experience in the family. I think it was my mother doing something similar in her experience. I wondered if you could say a bit more about how you work with that and how do you understand that, the way that agreements can be passed down through generations.
But fundamentally, if we understand us as human beings as products of our own childhood, our own family, our own parents, genetically, behaviourally, emotionally, we're cooked, if you like, in the marinade of the family system, primarily the relationship and the experience of relationship with and the experience of mother, and then siblings, and if there are any, and the wider family. But what our parents bring to the party is their childhood, is their formative experiences. And this isn't just nature versus nurture. Nurture implies that these are conscious choices that parents make to nurture their children. What we're looking at is how a nervous system is cooked in that marinade with its multiple sources and ingredients. And in that marinade, there is the personal experience of little Alex being a kid in that family system with that mother and that father, whether present or not, of siblings, whether present or not, grandparents, whether present or not.
Okay.
Then, if you go up the next layer, there's the parental childhoods. How did the parents' nervous systems, their nervous systems, learn how to be in the world, in the dance of their relationship as little kids, as infants, as school kids, with their parents and with their family systems, in the context of society and nation and tribe. Then if you chunk it up further and further, the further up you go, the more the bigger picture feeds in. If you're working with Jewish clients, for example, there's always a story of exile and Holocaust and being outsiders in medieval Europe. If you work with people of colour, a story you will know. There's a story of immigration. There's a story of racial prejudice. There's a story of colonialization. My background, both my parents were born in India, in British India, in the 1920s. My great-grandfather was a Church of England pastor. My great-great-uncle founded Nigeria, if you please. And I'm white, British, Anglo-Saxon, male, heterosexual. So there's a lot of context, which feeds into that marinade. So the thrill I find with EMDR is not just working with the particular trauma, the car crash or the sexual abuse or the bomb attack that the client brings. It's experiencing them in the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, and working together with curiosity, radical curiosity. How did all these influences, all these experiences, personal and collective and family and much bigger, how did they all come together to constellate into one Alexandra Stevens, for example, or one Mark Brayne?
Yeah.
And then it gets really interesting. And then we can begin to make a difference.
Yeah.
It isn't just a quick fix.
No, it is really interesting. It's fascinating because I have been thinking about that recently more, the wider collective traumas, etc., like you said, and I was thinking, well, how are we able to kind of get clarity around that? You said both your parents were in colonial India. Is that right? Yeah.
They were born
Yeah.
there, so both of my
Yeah.
grandfathers were senior civil servants in British,
Yeah.
in the Indian civil service that administered India
Yeah.
until 1947 with Indian independence. So
Yeah.
I'm steeped in the
Yes.
colonization of the late 19th century. I'm absolutely cooked in
Yeah.
colonial sauce.
So then how do we differentiate, whatever they might have experienced there in colonial India or colonial Africa, which I guess on one hand there could have been like, the power and the privilege and status, but I guess the undercurrent could have been different as well, perhaps fear about their position or whatever, fear about, the locals or whatever. I don't want to make things up, but,
Well,
how,
let me let me
tell
just
me.
help you not make things up. The
Yes.
story that both my parents bring, they were basically orphans.
Okay.
One talks about privilege and power,
Yeah.
but my parents born just innocent little kids
Mm.
in India. My father in 1921 near Chandigarh, and my mother in what's now Pakistan in Peshawar. They basically had no parenting because the fathers, were away doing big colonial things all the time,
Yeah.
just administering and travelling.
Yeah.
And their mothers were both of their Victorian-inspired generations that didn't do hugging and,
Yeah.
just disciplined children. So the parents hadn't a clue how to bring up children and were swept up in the sort of the society of the time, going out to dinner parties and cocktail parties and things. So sent away to boarding school at 5 and 6 in England. My father was brought up by a male Indian bearer, not even by a female. And his first language was Urdu, not English. He had so little contact with his parents that his first language was Urdu. And he was sent to boarding school, not really speaking English in England,
Yeah.
and didn't see his parents for the next 2 years. I invite clients and therapists likewise to climb out of sort of ideological boxes and sort of
Yeah.
this is colonization,
Yeah.
this is kind of imposition of colonial rule, white on black, and racial
Yeah.
discrimination. Each individual is born a human being primarily, whether they're black or white or Chinese or whether Aborigine or Wall Street trader's son, daughter. We're born so similar in our fundamental Homo sapiens capacities, but then we're each individually unique as a consequence of all of these inputs into our story. So kids, all of the socially correct ways of defining gender and race and all the rest of it, I think these are not terribly relevant to early childhood. What matters is the quality of attachment, is the quality of the infant's experience, and does their nervous system feel safe in the world? It's as simple as that. If their nervous system doesn't feel safe in the world, if little Alexandra, aged 1, clocks that her mother doesn't feel safe, her mother isn't really available because the mother is preoccupied with her distress, her relationship, her work, her social context and so on. Little Alex, age 1, prioritizes mother's emotion, makes sure that little Alex is in service to mother. And of course that's the wrong way round, because little Alex's mother needs to be there for little Alex, because otherwise little Alex's nervous system is learning to defer to other people all the time, to make other people okay all the time, probably to become a psychotherapist in later life.
Definitely. Yeah.
And it's the same with little Mark as well. So working with intergenerational story, we are finding what the nervous system is holding from those earliest years. Not because it's been written in a book, but because it's been felt and experienced. And then we rewire it.
Yeah. Everything has to be filtered through, whatever else a client might be bringing in terms of wider stuff or, societal stuff, cultural stuff. It all has to be filtered through the quality, the filter of the quality of their attachment relationship with their primary caregivers. That's
Yes.
what I'm understanding.
That's right.
And that makes sense. At the same time, I'm wondering, what about when there are perhaps people that come that want to process bigger stuff, right? So I've been reading recently a book by Resmaa Menakem called My Grandmother's Hands, who talks very much about white body supremacy. So he's an African American therapist. He talks very much about the impact of what the North Europeans did to the African Americans, and I'm also thinking about, say, for example, someone who comes and wants to process their experience of being gay and the judgments, the prejudice that there is or has been anyway in society towards homosexuality. So if someone wants to actually just process that as a more general topic, how is there a possible way to go about that in intergenerational EMDR, or would you still want to then bring it back to the parent-child relationship to begin with?
This is difficult territory because there's a lot of societal waking up in recent years around how women have been treated over the millennia, how racial relationships between different skin colour, different cultural backgrounds, diversity, sexuality, gender. A lot of this is good because it's waking people up to the importance of acknowledging difference and holding a space for difference. Where I really struggle with a lot of the contemporary thinking around racism and colonialism and so on is that it implies that there are bad actors out there, and that the individuals who come into psychotherapy are wounded and unable to fulfill their potential and be who they have the capacity to be because of the bad actors. In my understanding of the human condition, after having spent 76 years of living it and working with clients and reporting it as a BBC and a Reuters correspondent, for better or worse, Alex, where I have got to is that the fundamental dynamic that determines how an individual experiences themselves in the world is not about racism, is not about homophobia, is not about neurodiversity. Fundamentally, it's fundamentally about the felt sense of that individual nervous system in the first 1001 days and beyond. John Bowlby, the great writer and thinker and researcher on attachment, laid down or recognized that the first 1001 days from conception through to the second birthday were phenomenally formative in how any individual nervous system learns to be in the world. Now, my biggest teachers, I don't know if you can hear them off stage here, but I've got two little grandsons at the moment, aged 6 and 4, and they are my best teachers, and I've followed their journey from conception. They were both test tube, they were both IVF, interestingly. So one was put in the freezer for quite a while before he was unfrozen and became little Sasha. Watching their journey and their dance with their parents, but of course their father is our son, so we know a lot about the developmental journey of both father. We know quite a lot about the developmental journey of mother as well. But these little kids, we're watching them unfold in real time. And it's not about racism and not primarily about those dynamics. It's primarily about the quality of relationship with primary caregivers. And grandparents matter, but less than, they matter enormously. But the central relationship is that moment-by-moment dance between infant and mother in the context of infant, mother and father, whether there's a father present or not. I know that if I had had a diagnosis, quote unquote, at the age of 5 or 6, my life would have been very, very different indeed. But still, the primary formative experience is that of the mother I had, and the father I largely didn't have. He was present, but not present, because he didn't know how to be a dad, because he'd been sent to boarding school, hadn't had any parenting of his own when he was a kid. So I think, and this is very not popular to say, I think they're taking a lot of mental health thinking and treatment off track. It's all important to factor in, But what matters is how the two little kids of Alex are cooked in their very earliest years, as these little kids come into, work their way through childhood and into adulthood.
I mean, yeah, that is one of the questions. Yeah.
I guess, I mean, you're a colleague of colour. You've got a complex, genetic background and a complex developmental background.
Yeah.
Comfortable.
I mean, I'm listening. I'm appreciating your point of view. There's even part of me that could agree. So for me, there's always the piece of, well, where do I fit into all of this anyway? I'm sometimes not really feeling like I can fully resonate with either, either when white people talk or when people of colour talk about their experiences. So I guess in some ways that's also a good position, because it means I can be open to lots of different opinions, and I can be aware of my own, inner racism within, and maybe wanting to hedge away from talks like this and discomfort, even talking about things like this. For that reason, I want to ask, what your experience is, and I also want to figure out the best way to work with this myself, and to work with clients who do come and want to work, for example, with the experience of homosexuality, or not homosexuality, but prejudice against homosexuality, or the experience of being African American in the US. Every client is different, and everyone's experience is different. So I think ultimately for me, it'll be about just respecting the difference.
One of the key things that I train in working with attachment-informed EMDR is what I call the two tracks of the work that we do. The one track is the external track, the trauma track, if you like, the dysfunctional experience landing on a nervous system from outside. And that absolutely can include, and does include, racism and prejudice and bullying and being made to feel other. I mean, experiences that you know as a person of colour, and that I know as being autistic, feeling an outsider and being, let's not beat about the bush, being treated as an outsider, especially by other children. Children can be pretty damn cruel when they sense difference. And that's just built into the human condition. Unfortunately, that's just what children do in all cultures. If it isn't held well by the adults in the system, that then stays toxically in the system, which we then work with clients and being bullied at school and so on. And then there's the big traumas of, we talked about them before, of sexual abuse or violence, whatever. So there's the external track. But parallel to that, and equally important in a very different way, is the internal attachment track. So in other words, the meaning that the nervous system made of early childhood attachment experience. And therefore, how safe do I feel fundamentally in myself, in the world? Now, you talked about being caught between these two identities and not quite knowing, on the one hand, it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? On the one hand, it's an advantage because you can straddle different cultures with empathy and insider understanding. On the other side, it leaves you a bit uncertain about your identity and about your authenticity, and you've had to compromise authenticity to be attached. This is talking with Gabor Mate, who's very, very good on this, the author. But therefore, working with racism and homophobia, or the experience of being black in America, for example, yes, there's material to be worked with, but underneath it, what meaning of these experiences did the parents make? Did the mother make? How safe did mother feel in the world? Now, you speak of being caught, but being a bit uncertain about your identity in the world between these two different cultures. I suspect very strongly that your mother was uncertain about her identity. Now, she was white. She wasn't caught in a question of racial identity. But I can bet my bottom dollar that your mother was uncertain about her place in the world because of the uncertainties in which she was cooked as a little kid. And her mother's uncertainties, her mother's vulnerabilities, the relationship between your grandparents, where did that leave your mother in terms of how solidly grounded and found, rooted in safety did she feel as she emerged into adulthood? And of course, that all gets passed on to the kids. And not because mother says things, but because mother is things. So this ambivalence about who am I You don't have to have a background in racial difference or in neurodivergence or in different sexual preferences or identity. You don't need to have any of that to feel extremely uncertain about yourself in the world. In EMDR, I work in a way that takes us back to those attachment-informed formative roots in the context of bad things that can happen in the outside. So the two tracks.
Makes sense. And yes, you're right. Your bottom dollar that you bet was right. Definitely, she had a feeling of not belonging that went back to previous generations.
Yeah. And so in the work that you're doing with the podcast and writing the book, you are healing not just Alex Stevens's experience. You're doing intergenerational work by sort of taking responsibility for it, by being curious about it.
Yes. Yeah.
By sort of saying, to the best of my ability, the buck stops here. And I'm going to do my best not to pass it on to my kids.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the book part in that way. Definitely it's what I'm trying to do with the parenting. And yes, also agree, I will definitely be passing stuff on anyway, unfortunately. But yeah.
That's life.
Yeah, that's life. But my question, so I do want to know how it works, but I just also want to know if you could say a bit more, something about shame, because that's something I've been talking about with other people that I've been interviewing. Because we're talking about the quality of the attachment between the child and the parent, and that's dependent on the parent's nervous system. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about how can we end up with shame? How is it that so many of us can end up with feelings of unworthiness, of not good enough, and even that felt sense experience of I'm not good enough, kind of making ourselves smaller.
This is one of the most interesting bits to answer, and this is right at the root of why and how I work with attachment-informed EMDR. When we're small, when you were small, when I was small, when my little grandsons are still small, if bad things are happening in the family system, and if mother is unsafe, if mother is anxious, if mother is angry, if mother is absent, it's all the child's fault. The child needs to assume, on an evolutionary basis, survival informed, that it must be me that's bad. Because if mum is bad, if mother is bad, or father is bad, the evolutionary dynamic of any organism is to distance yourself from the source of threat. That is built into us as mammals, as life forms on the planet. You touch even a plant, it will shrink back. You reach out to a cat that's feeling frightened, it will shrink back and go into the dark under the bed. This is mammalian, this is animal, this is what life forms do. They are programmed to withdraw from a source of potential life-threatening danger. Now, if a 2-year-old Alex, a 6-year-old Mark, withdraws on the plains of Africa 200,000 years ago, where we were all started out, Homo sapiens started out, what happens if I remove myself from my primary caregiver?
Yeah, you'll end up dead meat.
You're dead meat. You'll be a hyena's lunch. You'll be a lioness's lunch in no time at all. You see this in David Attenborough films, documentaries. What predators try to do, African wolves, or crocodiles, whatever, they try to separate the young or the vulnerable from the pack. I mean, crocodiles don't actively try and separate buffalo, small impalas or whatever, or wildebeests, but they will go. The predator goes for the vulnerable and the sick. If a child separates themselves out from mother and is without protection, they are dead almost immediately. Certainly by the time the hyena's lunchtime comes round. So, in evolutionary terms, it is an absolute imperative for the small child to stay focused on mother, to stay connected to mother, to ensure that mother continues to protect, to feed, to clothe, to enable to survive. Now, if it's to stay connected with a dysfunctional mother or father or family system or family, there's bad stuff happening. If it's my fault, guess where the shame comes from? The shame gets embedded as a survival response. It's like a suit of armour. It actually enables me to stay connected to primary caregivers who enable my survival, literally, keeps the genes going, selfish gene, and the tool that I use to survive is shame. It's honestly, Alex, as simple as that. And it's right at the heart of most of the work we do. So if we honour that shame and say, of course you feel shame, you had to. Shame was my shame, especially about being autistic and being misunderstood. It was all my fault. I had a shame list, Alex, as long as your arm. And I would say I only cleared it 5 years ago. I still feel it a bit here and there.
I love that. I don't love what you were saying about how
it's tough, isn't it?
Comes along. But I love what you said, because I had similar thinking, but when you say shame gets embodied as a survival armor, that really nails it for me. That really brings it home. That it's not just that you had to; it's that you had to survive. You had to take that on to survive.
And so we welcome the shame. So in therapy, we welcome the shame as an aspect of self and say, okay, how did you learn? Let's work with the nervous system. How did you learn to put that suit of armour on to survive that moment? Virtually every single client I work with has a version of this. And what we use is we use the experience of shame or dysfunction or distress in the here and now, where it is dysfunctional, and we use that as a kind of launch pad, a bridging point, to mix my metaphors. And we go across the bridge into the past. We take big Alex, use your intuitive nervous system, your thoughts, your feelings, your physical sensations, your experience of self in the here and now to bridge into the past. And when we do it well, it takes us unerringly into the formative stories, not necessarily the traumas. Usually it's not the trauma. It's that moment in the bedroom all on your own when mum and dad are screaming at each other in the kitchen. It's being bullied by an older sibling or having a very jealous younger sibling who steals my toys and mother doesn't come in and ensure that justice is done. These are big experiences which get internalized, and we're working with them 70 years later.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was smiling or grimacing slightly thinking about something like that happened this weekend with a very jealous younger sibling
with your
taking
kids.
Away the older one's toys, and I probably didn't deal with it as well as I should have.
Well, don't worry. They can take it to therapy in 40 years' time.
Yeah. I better save up enough money so I can pay for it all.
And the important thing to recognise, by the way, is that we are not putting mothers on trial here. It's incredibly important. Mothers are central because we're all born of a female body. Mothers really matter. And it's not acknowledged enough in contemporary society at all, in Western society. Mothers matter centrally. They matter in a particular way that is different from fathers. Fathers matter, but they matter differently. Fathers matter a lot. Grandparents, families matter. But we're not putting mothers on trial. We're putting them central. But one of the things, you've heard me say it in the trainings that we do, I don't think I've ever met a mother who didn't do her best, even when it was catastrophically dysfunctional, abusive, terrible. But the reason that mother is failing is because she was failed. And her nervous system literally can't do the good mothering. She's doing her best, and it's awful. So we find that's where we would go into the childhood story of the mother. How did the mother's nervous system get to be this way? This is the exciting thing about the intergenerational piece, that we actually do EMDR on the mother.
So for someone who's listening who doesn't know much about this, even when I've said it in therapy to people, they're like, what, we have to bring my mum into the therapy session? I'm like, no. So could you say, how do we do EMDR on someone's mother's story?
And people do push back. I do not want to do therapy on my mother. I never want to see the woman again, or she's a complete nightmare, or my mother didn't do a thing wrong, so this is not appropriate to go into my mother's story. It's a bit like speaking a language. You're quite good at English. You find English quite simple, but you spend a lot of years learning it as a child. And when you learn EMDR in this way, it can feel very clunky to start with. But once you get the hang, it gets quite simple. Because we go into, little Alex is, if we were to bridge you from an experience of shame in the here and now, failing to sort your kids out, when a toy gets borrowed or gets stolen, and you're feeling shame because you're not a good enough mother. We could bridge you from that, from the here and now, and we'd find a little kid who's having an experience of mothering that is suboptimal, should we say. And little Alex is age 3 or something, and her experience is being managed by your mum, by little Alex's mum, as best she can, but not very well. What we would then do, we'd work with you, adult Alex, remembering little Alex, and you're my interpreter, as it were, conveying the experience, emotional, cognitive, somatic, of little Alex, the experience that's still in the system, still running in your nervous system today. And EMDR is very good at rewiring, repairing those early formative experiences. So where your mum failed to meet you in the way you needed to be met as a little kid, which happens a lot in parenting, what we can do is we work with that experience and we rewire it so that little Alex, in effect, knows that big Alex is there and can now look after her. So she's not on her own in the world, because big Alex gets it, not just cognitively, but she's emotionally present to her younger self. And the younger stories cease to hurt as much as they did. We can then, this metaphor of the interpreter, that you are my interpreter connecting through to little Alex, who then tells us her story and conveys her story with feelings and physical memory and stories and pictures and narratives and my brother, whatever. We can then sit your mother down when clearly mum or dad have had a dysfunctional response, maybe a very angry dad, maybe a very neglectful mother, maybe an angry mother or an anxious mother or an over-caring mother. In your imagination, we sit mother down in our shared imagination. You give her the headphones that we use to do the bilateral stimulation in EMDR, in your imagination and in mine. And then I talk to your mum, not literal mum, because your mum isn't literally in the session, but what we're working with is your nervous system's memory of the mother you had when you were 3, when you were 6. So we then sit her down with compassion and kindness and say, I say through big Alex to mum, to your mum, let's call her Mary at this point. So Mary, just a moment or two ago, your little girl was having this experience, that experience, or you were doing this and little Alex was experiencing that. What are you feeling, Mary? Because I do image, emotion, body, belief. That's the sequence. What are you feeling? Brackets, in big Alex's body. Clearly the emotions are going to be sort of reflecting, resonating, but they're yours. They're not literally your mother's, but they're a memory of her emotion from childhood. What are you feeling, Mary? Where are you feeling that in Alex's body, in your body? And what's the belief about yourself that goes with that? And it's amazing, an angry mother who is really punishing her child, her belief about herself when we go in there might be, I'm being a bad mother. I don't feel safe. I'm out of control. And you can hear the nervous, so the planet turns on its axis. And then I invite the mother in the remembered imagination to drop back in time, to go back as far as she can, to the first place she lands. And of course, you're not remembering your mother's childhood, but it resonates on. And the extraordinary thing is that in the imagination, sometimes even when you don't know the first thing about your mother's childhood, the imagination takes you where you need to go. There's a kind of genetic memory somehow that's in the system. It's quite extraordinary how accurate it often is. And then we work on mum. We work on little Mary, age 3, age 6. And sometimes we go back and work on grandma, or on granddad. And the story comes out. And we come back then to Mary in little Alex's childhood experience. How are you now? How is that now? And if we bring little Alex back in, because we take her out at the beginning in the imagination and sort of send her off to play in the playground with lots of lovely support figures and things. If we brought little Alex back in, is there anything you'd like to say or do? And almost invariably, mum says, oh, I feel so bad about how I treated her at that time. I'd like to give her a hug and say, I'm so sorry. Would you like to imagine that? And tap, tap, tap. We switch the tappers on. And it's sometimes so tender And then I say, thank you, Mary, for the work you've just done. I come back to big Alex and say, okay, Alex, remembering when you were 3, when you were 6. How is that now? And usually there's a big shift.
Yeah, I mean, I love that protocol that you've come up with. I use it a lot with my clients, and I think it's highly effective. So thank you for explaining it so well.
I hope I've explained it in a way that a beginner might understand. The key thing is to recognise we're not working with a literal mother. We're working with the nervous system's memory of a mother.
That's what I was going to
father.
say, because that's the bit that sometimes people might think, or you know, how can you work? Someone might say, well, I don't have an objective memory of my mother. You know, I wasn't my mother. But yeah, what you said is true. It's the sort of the narrative or that goes with the nervous system experience of mother that we're working with.
The nervous system remembers. That's the brilliant thing about working this way.
Yeah, and that brings me on to the other thing that you said. You know, I wrote it down, sort of almost like a genetic memory. Yeah, and I think that's fascinating as well, and it makes me think about epigenetics and the work of Yehuda and stuff, and you know, this idea that trauma can actually also be passed on genetically as well. So that sometimes
a susceptibility to trauma it's been proved now. Rachel Yehuda, working in New York with mice and with Holocaust and 9/11 survivors, it's been well proven now that there is an element of epigenetic transmission of trauma sensibility. And that's part of the picture. And there's a very good book worth reading. I don't agree with all of it. It Didn't Start With You by Mark Brayne.
Yes.
Where he tells stories that replicate themselves down the generations almost word for word. I would say behaviourally almost identically. You think, weird, that's weird. How does that happen? Is it the quantum field? You know, do we all have a second life? Are there alternative planets running at the same time? Who knows? But there is an interesting dimension to intergenerational experience that's worth working with in psychotherapy.
I wanted to ask you one other thing that comes up a lot. This idea that you cannot really fully process trauma unless you process it somatically through the body, and that thinking about it is not just enough. I anticipate what you're going to say. EMDR is not just thinking about it, but I wondered if you could say a bit more about, you know, this sort of thinking that there's got to be a somatic processing of trauma.
That's a very good question on which I have opinions or experience in the EMDR world, which is not mainstream at the moment, but I think it might become mainstream longer term. EMDR was built on an understanding, an expectation, a requirement that the clients experience emotion, that it works through the emotional and also the embodied dimensions of memory. That, in fact, I'm just finalising a presentation to the EMDR annual conference in person in Los Angeles next month on this. And Shapiro, I was reminded that Francine Shapiro, who first put the EMDR protocol together in late 1980s, she expected and sort of required that we desensitize. We activate dysfunctional emotion, we desensitize it in phase 4 of the 8-phase EMDR protocol. I'm finding that in my work, working with narrative, just talking about it won't do it. It's absolutely right. Psychoanalysis can go so far, and it doesn't, in my book, complete the journey. I'm not a great fan of psychoanalysis as a complete psychotherapeutic modality. It does a lot of things that are very useful, which I use in my own EMDR. But EMDR adds that processing piece, which does the bilateral stimulation and activating emotion, body, and belief in the context of remembered and imagined narrative. Ultimately, where I think EMDR works is in the consolidation, the experience of the unpacking of meaning. And this is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. Carl Jung as well. We are fundamentally, as human beings, creatures of narrative, stories on legs. We are seeking meaning in our life. And meaning generates health, survival capacity, even in the worst possible circumstances, like in Auschwitz, as Viktor Frankl wrote, or after the worst things that people could do to each other. if we can make meaning of it in the greater scheme of things, as it were, it becomes part of who we are, of our growth. And resilience then comes from not just surviving trauma, but growing through it. Post-traumatic growth being the most likely outcome from trauma rather than post-traumatic stress disorder. And I find in my EMDR that the fundamental thing that happens is that there's this consolidation of meaning, being able to feel one's way into one's own past, process what needs to be processed, the emotions and the unfinished trauma that's sitting in the system, the dysfunctional shame responses, now dysfunctional, once functional shame responses. We process them. And at the end, we look at our story. You look at your story. I look at my story and say, yep, that's the way it was. And it doesn't hurt anymore. I wish it had been different. And I wish in many ways that I was different still to this day. But do you know what? It's the life I had. It's the legacy I was given. It's the cards I was dealt. And I can do my best to play those cards as well as I can now and moving forward. Because you can't change what happened in the past, but you can change how it's stored in your nervous system and how it informs the present. Mm-hmm. And is it worth doing this journey? You bet. Can EMDR help? You bet. There we are. I hope that sort of answered at least some of your questions a bit.
Well, can I just have one quick follow-up?
Yeah.
Which is I hear that, so it's the emphasis for you is on the meaning making, we're, as you said, we're a narrative on legs, but still then how, I'm thinking about people that might say that, for example, the somatic experiencing, or is it Peter Levine, that you have to actually physically metabolize the flight instinct, for example. I guess that could happen in an EMDR session, right? That someone might connect with the flight instinct.
Absolutely.
And shake their legs or move their legs.
But in my experience, you don't have to. Okay. EMDR very rarely works without quite a lot of tears. You want to have EMDR above all is grief work, ultimately, so you can grieve the past you had and grieve the past you didn't have. And EMDR is working not when legs are shaking, but when there's snot coming out of somebody's nose. Mm-hmm. Where they're crying, they're sobbing so intensely, there's literally snot coming out of the nose. Then you know it's working.
Okay.
Or when they say, "That's weird. What have you just done to me? Are you a witch or something?" Mm-hmm. Or a wizard? The W word. Weird, witch and wizard. Maybe they've all got the same roots in Latin or Greek or something. But no, yes, all of the ways of working with trauma, and Peter Levine and Waking the Tiger and somatic experiencing, they all have good things to bring to the party. Ultimately, for me, EMDR is the one that does that cuts the mustard, that does the business.
It needs the thinking, it needs the emotion, it needs the body, it needs the holistic experience. And I think
that's right.
EMDR is able to address the holistic.
That's what it does. Process. It's a comprehensive psychotherapy.
Yeah.
And all of the other psychotherapeutic modalities can feed into the richest possible EMDR.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really appreciated that conversation and learnt a lot as well.
It's been great fun. Thanks for the invitation.
Bye-bye.